Hello everybody, it's Miss Peachy from your WCA biology class, and this is our very first video. In this class, I'm going to have a supplemental video to go through each of your lessons. There's actually a lot of videos, which is unusual. I don't usually do this many for my classes, but biology is special because biology is kind of a tricky class. Um, Biology tends to have a lot of vocabulary in it, and some of that vocabulary is kind of complicated. You have words that you might not have heard of before, and because those words are very scientific, it makes it a lot harder to understand. We can see our keywords from the first major lesson, which is Unit 2, Lesson 2. We have ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, autotroph, biomolecule, carbohydrate, carbon, covalent bond, hydrocarbon, lipid, macromolecule, nucleic acid, protein, and starch. And some of those you may have heard of before, and some of them you may never have heard of before. So it's my hope that with these little videos, I'm kind of going over some of those main ideas so that you have a better understanding of what we're learning in class. Along with the videos, I also have a note sheet that I will have for you that goes along with the videos. So the video links, the note sheets, those are all linked on my website, which hopefully you'll become very comfortable using as the year progresses. And just, this is just an outline. There's not much in here. So my suggestion is to have this note sheet opened and ready to type into, or have a paper copy of it ready to go as you're kind of going through this video with me today. The other thing is that the video alone will not give you all of the information in the units themselves. So we'll go through the highlights, but you still need to go through that unit on your own. It's just that if you watch the video first and kind of go through it with me, then as you're reading it, you're going to understand things a little bit better, and you're probably not going to have to read it more than once, or maybe, you'll just have a better concept, better understanding of the main concepts. So that's what we're going through. So this first unit is on the building blocks of life. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have our, here, if I can find it here. I want the note sheet in front of me so that I can kind of make sure that I'm following the note sheet as I go, okay? So one of the first things on the note sheet talks about carbon and its properties. So you may have heard this before, but we are carbon-based life forms. Actually, all life on Earth, all life that we know of, is carbon-based. So carbon's a pretty important molecule, or a pretty important atom, makes pretty important molecules, right? It's a non-metallic element that makes up all living things. It's really, really important, and for many different reasons. So it has an atomic number of 6, which means it has 6 protons in its nucleus. Also, it has 6 electrons. 2 of them are in the inner orbital, 4 in the outer orbital. So it has 4 electrons in its valence shell, which we can see here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each one of these electrons provides a site for other atoms to bond to. So it has 4 bonding sites. And because of its atomic number of 4, or of 6, so a valence number of 4, it can actually bond to itself as well. So carbon can bond to metals, it can bond to nonmetals, and it can bond to other carbon atoms. So carbon can form these very long, complex molecules that are made up of more than one carbon atom. Carbon tends to form covalent bonds with other nonmetals, such as oxygen and hydrogen, and a covalent bond occurs when electrons are shared between atoms. Hydrogen only has 1 electron, so carbon can bond with multiple hydrogens, right? Kind of as we're going through, we can see some of the things that carbon is bonding with. Carbon's bonding with 2 oxygens here, making carbon dioxide, with 4 hydrogens in this situation, making methane. And so a carbon atom that is bonded to a hydrogen can form a molecule called a hydrocarbon. Hydrocarbon is a compound made up of hydrogen and carbons. Not that hard, right? Hydrocarbon. We see these oftentimes in long chain molecules with multiple carbons and multiple hydrogens attached. Biomolecules are molecules that are produced by living things, such as carbohydrates. We like to eat carbohydrates. Plants like to make carbohydrates. So plants are producing carbohydrates. We also produce biomolecules as well, such as lipids and proteins and nucleic acids. So we are producing biomolecules in our bodies as well. Carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins and nucleic acids are known as macromolecules because they're just really big. So macromolecules by definition is a large molecule that contains many proteins. Carbohydrates. Now, these are produced by plants. They're eaten by us. Here you can see that long chain hydrocarbon. Look at all those carbons and all those hydrogens. This is a model of a hydrocarbon, right? Carbohydrates are biomolecules whose building blocks are simple sugars. So you've got simple sugars like glucose, and you put a bunch of them together, and it makes this very long molecule called a carbohydrate. So carbohydrate would be more complex. It's a macromolecule. It is a polymer. And then we have these glucose, which are these simple guys, just simple. This is a ring shape here, hydrocarbon. What's cool about carbohydrates or sugars are these are our energy sources, right? We eat carbohydrates for energy. We burn carbohydrates for energy. So we use carbohydrates for energy. They are burned in our body in a process of cellular respiration. And so we can actually use one type of a macromolecule to make another. You can use carbohydrates, for example, to make lipids or to make proteins and nucleic acids in your own body. So you're taking one type of a macromolecule, which we need and are unable to produce ourselves, and we're using our body mechanisms to make the molecules we need for survival. So the other macromolecules we have are lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. These are like the four biggies: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. A protein is our biomolecules that are made up of amino acids as their building blocks. And so they're made up of many different amino acids, all kind of bonded together to make a protein, and then they're folded into a funny shape, and that shape is equally as important as their structure. And they perform many different functions in the body. There are functional proteins and there are structural proteins as well. So some proteins actually do things, like enzymes, for example, do things in your body. One example is a protein called ATP synthase, which is a type of enzyme that actually produces another molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, right? So that's one, and that's an energy carrier. So it's just a really kind of cool the way it works. Some are structural proteins that make things like your hair and nails and muscles and things like that, right? So there are different types of proteins. Then we have nucleic acids, and we have two nucleic acids. We have DNA and RNA. Those are the two nucleic acids that we have. And as you know, and probably have heard, DNA is the main molecule of life, right? That DNA is housed in the nucleus of every cell in your body, and it stores all the information needed to make you who you are and to be able to perform all the functions to keep you alive. So you wouldn't be here if it weren't for the DNA that is encoding all that information. And then we also have RNA, and RNA is another type of nucleic acid that helps to, the RNA that you have actually helps your body produce proteins. So there's all sorts of cool stuff that happen with these main types of macromolecules. And then finally we have lipids, which I skipped over. And lipids, or think of lipids like fats. And I know a lot of people are like, ooh, fat. I don't want to eat fat. I'm going to have a low-fat diet. It's, not good for you. But you do need fat in your diet. It's very important. There are essential fats, right? Things like omega-3s and things that help you to function. So you have, on your cell, you have a cellular membrane, and that is made up of a lipid bilayer. If you didn't have fats in your diet, you wouldn't be able to make new cells. So it's just one way in which your body uses fats in your body to help create cell membranes. They are also used to create types of molecules called hormones. And those hormones are molecules that send messages from one part of your body to another so that your brain can tell a different part of your body what to do using those types of chemical signals. And then in the lesson, let's see here, it goes on to talk about how glucose is transformed into starch in plants. Starch is an energy storage molecule. And then you break that starch down, and your body uses that energy that's stored to make something called ATP, that adenosine triphosphate, which is how you then are able to get short-term energy. We also we store fat for long-term energy storage, and our body blood sugar is glucose. So there's other sugars and stuff in our body as well. All right, so moving on to the last part of the lesson here. Talks about the building blocks of life. Remember, plants produce their own food. Plants are a type of autotroph. Autotrophs are organisms that make their own food. Plants are called photoautotrophs. Photo meaning they use photosynthesis, right? But there are another type of autotroph called a chemoautotroph, which are very less common. Chemoautotrophs are commonly found in underwater thermal vents, lava beds, and deep in the soil, and they use chemicals and heat to be able to produce their own food. So they're still able to produce food using the process of synthesis, the synthesis reaction, but instead of using the sun as the source of energy, they're using chemical energy from wherever they're getting it from the water or from the soil. So the last thing that's talked about here is the nitrogen cycle. In the nitrogen cycle, we have different bacteria that kind of live within the soil, and those bacteria help to change nitrogen. Nitrogen is necessary in plants to be able to, for that plant to survive. It's like a very fundamental ingredient for plants to survive. But they can't use the nitrogen in the atmosphere. They have to have a different form of nitrogen. So nitrogen in the atmosphere is in the form of N2. That's something plants cannot use. They need a different type of nitrogen, and they need NO3, which is a different kind of nitrogen. And they're able to get that nitrogen through bacteria, which can take atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into nitrogen chemicals that can be absorbed by plants. There are also bacteria in the soil that then take some of that nitrogen produced in the soil by decomposition, and they're able to take that nitrogen and convert it back to N2 and put it back in the atmosphere. So you've got bacteria which convert it to something usable by plants, and you've got other bacteria which are decomposers that can then take, like a decaying plant, the nitrogen that is released and convert it back into atmospheric nitrogen to be used again. And that cycle is called the nitrogen cycle. So that's all the content that was covered. It's in brief. I'm not giving you the depth that you can when you read through it, but I wanted to give you the highlights, the main points. And in some lessons, you're going to find that if the concepts are really kind of more difficult, that's where this will come in handy, is for me to kind of go into those more difficult concepts a bit and explain them, I think, in a way that's a little easier to understand. All right, so take care, everybody. I'll see you in the next unit.